Okay, hey everyone, welcome back to the first current events stream of 2020. If you haven't already, go vote in the poll, and Brandon will get back to it.
All right, cool. So we'll start off with current events as usual, and then we'll end up with 2020 election updates. So first of all, welcome back to one of the first student streams of Fiveable. To know when upcoming streams are happening or to read new content, I would highly recommend you follow Fiveable social media, their Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube channel. Highly recommend it. You'll be in the loop. Also, I would highly recommend that you follow our AP Gov and AP Lang teams. So every Monday at 8:30 Eastern, you will have a weekly current events and election update stream with either Fatima, Brandon, me, or Akalesh. AP GoPo will always be streaming on Tuesdays with the rest of the social sciences. So for instance, tomorrow there's going to be a review over foundational documents, and AP Lang always streams on Mondays at 7 p.m. Eastern, so about an hour and a half before this stream starts. And next Monday, there will be a stream over argument introduction paragraphs with Stephanie Kirk. So in today's stream, what we're going to essentially be covering first is we're going to start off with the impeachment inquiry updates. Then we'll talk about de-escalation and turmoil in Iran, cover some other current events, and then we'll transition into Fatma's side of the stream where we talk about the 2020 election and news in the FEC or Federal Election Commission. Once again, if you have any questions, you can feel free to ask questions in the Ask a Question tab, or just ask us in the chat and we'll answer it as we go. So the first thing is coming soon to a hearing near you is the impeachment trial. So as you may or may not know, the impeachment articles of impeachment have passed the House. So the president is impeached but not removed. And Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, has basically kept the articles from going to the Senate, basically as a strategy to get the Senate to essentially follow the rules that she wanted negotiated. So essentially allowing witnesses to testify, which originally Republicans wanted a really fast trial and basically wanted the president to be acquitted as soon as possible. But Nancy Pelosi has finally decided to meet with her caucus about sending the articles to the Senate. She'll be naming impeachment managers who will basically be like lawyers for the prosecution, and they will be giving the case for impeachment on the Senate floor. The Senate trial right now looks like it's going to begin the Tuesday after Martin Luther King Jr., so January 21st. The Senate will meet about 6 days a week, except Sunday. And the last time we had an impeachment trial in 1999 under President Clinton, it took about 37 days from when the Senate received the articles of impeachment to when they acquitted President Clinton. So it's going to be about a month of constant testimony, arguments, although many are estimating that it's probably going to be a little bit shorter this year just because there's not as much to say. And unless there are multiple witnesses like subpoenaed or called to testify by either the Trump team or the Democrats or the House impeachment managers. In fact, when we talk about the fight over the rules, we're seeing that Senate Democrats are arguing that the initial rules package that they'll vote on should be including like witnesses. So what the main argument in the Senate has been is that Republicans are saying, oh, we should follow historical precedent under President Clinton, where you first start the impeachment trial, and then in the middle of the trial, you hold a vote deciding whether or not we should include witnesses. Yet many have argued, especially from the Democrat side of the aisle, that this is just pushing the decision later on and that it's not a fair and impartial trial if neither side gets to call witnesses. But McConnell has already said, or Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell has already asserted to the press that he has the votes to adopt those 1999 Clinton rules, although we've seen moderate Republican senators, Susan Collins from Maine and Lisa Murkowski from Alaska, who were pictured in that bottom right picture, saying that they want witnesses to testify and that they're already negotiating within their moderate bloc about bringing witnesses to the Senate floor. Already the White House has basically conceded that there are probably going to be witnesses in the trial, as it just needs to be a simple majority vote of 51 to 49 to allow for witnesses to testify. Senators Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, Susan Collins of Maine, Mitt Romney of Utah, Cory Gardner of Colorado, Lamar Alexander of Tennessee, and Rand Paul of Kentucky. By the way, if those are any of your senators, leave a comment in the chat. I want to see where y'all are from geographically. But National Security Advisor John Bolton, who some wanted to testify during the House impeachment proceedings, basically he said no, but now that the Senate is holding their trial, he noted in a press release that he would testify if the Senate subpoenaed him. But the White House is already saying they're just going to exert executive privilege, basically saying that, oh, the conversations with the president are private and shouldn't be on the floor of the legislative branch. And speaking of the legislative branch and the executive branch, this is an AP Gov tie-in, because our Constitution preserves freedom through separation of powers and a system of checks and balances. So as you may know, basically the Congress has a check on the president by impeaching him, and the president has a check over Congress by vetoing things like legislation. In fact, one of the key documents you need to know for AP GoPo is Federalist 51 by James Madison, which asserts that ambition must be made to counteract ambition. Basically, the whole argument of checks and balances, asserting that in order for members of each branch to stay independent, they can't encroach on others, and they have to be independent while also having the power to check each other. So I guess that sort of brings the discussion on the whole argument of executive privilege and whether or not the president should be able to withhold witnesses from testifying in Congress. Many are arguing that the Trump administration is violating checks and balances and going against the spirit of Federalist 51. In terms of AP English language, I would argue that this is a really, really good way to talk about politics in sort of a nonpartisan way in response to something that is an argument essay prompt. So something like last year's prompt, select a concept, place, role to which you believe that the term overrated should be applied, then write a well-developed essay in which you explain your judgment. So I think talking about impeachment and talking about how the system of checks and balances has essentially become overrated due to partisanship, that's something you could write about. For instance, last year I wrote to this prompt about how American politics was overrated just because of the constant gridlock in Senate and how legislation barely ever passed, and that although Congress and the government theoretically should be preserving the rights of the people, it's not actually happening. So that's one way I approached that prompt, but you could definitely bring up impeachment and a bunch of the current events that we'll be talking about in today's stream in your argument essays. I think that's where AP Lang really comes in with current events. You can bring those up as support for your thesis. All right, so now we'll move into sort of foreign policy with the United States. So as you might have seen from Robbie's stream on Thursday about Iran, basically there's been some turmoil after the United States assassinated basically second in command General Qasem Soleimani. And basically they argued that he was going to attack United States embassies and that there was an imminent threat. Iran sought revenge, so they basically gave that proportionate attack, which is sort of regarded as allowed by international law, by launching strikes on Iraqi bases that housed US troops, although there were 0 American casualties. But both Democrats and Republicans, including Senator Mike Lee of I think Utah, and Rand Paul of Kentucky, many of them are arguing that we shouldn't have assassinated Soleimani. We shouldn't be getting into endless wars like the Trump administration or President Trump promised in 2016, because there really was a lack of an imminent threat. In fact, we saw that the Trump administration contradicted themselves when Defense Secretary Mark Esper said that he saw no intelligence of any kind of imminent threat on US embassies, even though President Trump tweeted a few hours earlier that there was a threat. Moreover, we're actually seeing that within Iran, there is a lot of internal turmoil because of the shooting, basically a missile shot down Ukrainian International Airlines Flight 752, which was scheduled, it was a 737-800 scheduled to leave from Tehran and land in Kiev. And basically, the Iranian government and military were like, oh, we thought it was a US plane, we thought it was radar activity. But the issue is, the majority of the 176 passengers whose lives were lost were Iranian. So we're already seeing that on the streets of Iran, many are shouting that the supreme leader should step down, that Soleimani deserved to die, things like that. So we're seeing that there really isn't a lot of unity against America. Right now, we're seeing a lot of internal turmoil in which the Iranian police are shutting down any kind of rebellion or protests, things like that. In terms of other international events outside of Iran, we saw that President Tsai Ing-wen was reelected as president of Taiwan under the Democratic People's Party. And this election was sort of contested because very heavily contested because had the opposition party Kuomintang won, basically like they were advocating for China and Taiwan to become like reunited. But the previous president, Tsai Ing-wen, was arguing that Taiwan should become more independent from China and actually like, be their own separate country and have sovereignty. So that sort of reaffirms that the Taiwanese people really don't want to be like still close with China. They want to be their own country. In addition, thousands of Australians are calling for Prime Minister Scott Morrison to resign due to his negligence over the bushfires, which are basically all over the country of Australia. We saw that he was actually on vacation in Hawaii instead of actually in the country during that state of emergency, which was pretty embarrassing for his government. And also, Brexit is definitely happening at the end of the month, January 31st. The withdrawal agreement bill passed the House of Commons and is going to the House of Lords by a vote of 330 to 231. So that's your foreign policy update for the day. And now I'll transition over to Fatma for the 2020 election updates.
Okay, so it's been a hot second since like we've talked about anything that's like happened in like the Democratic primary world, just because it was like doing review season and stuff like that. So we'll start with a little update on who's still in the race and who's dropped out. So just recently, like within the last week, both Senator Cory Booker and our author Marianne Williamson both dropped out of the race. And so Senator Cory Booker, he just couldn't gain traction with early state or national voters. And so and very early on when he joined the race, he seemed to be like a very viable candidate. That just didn't end up panning out when you look at like polling and his inability to like actually qualify for debates. So when he dropped out, he sent this email to his supporters, and one of the quotes from it is that he got in the race for president because he believed to his core that the answer to the common pain Americans are feeling is to reignite our spirit of common purpose, to take on our challenges and build a more just country for everyone. So he'll survive. Don't worry. He's still a senator. You don't get your title stripped just because you didn't become the Democratic nominee for president. But it was a very disappointing thing for his campaign because he was obviously trying to like become the nominee and defeat Trump eventually, right? And so another person who dropped out was author Marianne Williamson. And so it had been quite a while since she was like in the news. And that's specifically because of the fact that she was a very unconventional candidate. She also did not support vaccines. So there was just a lot going on with her, and she just couldn't gain traction in like the national media. And so she hadn't been qualifying for debates and hadn't been polling well. So like that brought an end to her campaign. So yeah. And then another person who dropped out very recently is a former Secretary of Housing, Julian Castro. And it was just a couple weeks ago that he dropped out. Like all of this is very recent in terms of developments. And so he was a very big champion of immigration reform and fighting poverty. And those were kind of the two main things that he was running on. And so in a email that he sent to his supporters, he talked about how he wasn't a front runner in either both this race and his entire life. And that because his family like immigrated to America, his story is a testament of what is possible for when the country gets it right, when like people are supported by the country and embraced. So once again, like he'll be fine. Senator Kamala Harris has also dropped out. And so she dropped out in December, and we haven't had a current event stream very recently, so I thought I'd include her too. And so she decided to drop out because she couldn't fund her campaign. And so it just couldn't keep going in terms of infrastructure and making sure that like everything was staffed out. So she talked about how she wasn't a billionaire. And that's like kind of interesting because there actually are a couple billionaires in the race, right? Like when you look at Mike Bloomberg, who's running right now, and or Tom Steyer, like they're both like very wealthy people who are in the race and to a very large extent are able to like self-fund and draw on their connections within like the business world. Like, so that was something very interesting that she talked about. in terms of like being able to run a sustainable presidential campaign, funding is very important. And so all of these candidates face like very common issues, like an inability to like qualify for debate stages because they weren't polling well in early states or national polls, and having just not enough funding to make sure that their campaign can keep running. So those are the four major people that dropped out very recently. And so tomorrow, Tuesday, is going to be the next Democratic debate. And so the people who are going to be on the stage are VP Joe Biden, Senator Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, former Mayor Pete Buttigieg, Senator Kamala, or Senator Amy Klobuchar, and businessman Tom Steyer. So what they needed to get on the stage was at least 5% in 4 DNC-approved national or early state polls, or 7% in 2 early state polls. And so just a quick explanation of what qualifies as an early state. It's kind of pretty much just like based on what people have decided. It's states like Nevada, Iowa, New Hampshire, and South Carolina. And it pretty much just means that they come early in the primary season. And so like they tend to have more of an influence on who ends up becoming the Democratic nominee, because it's sort of like they're the first people, or the voters in those states are the first people to declare their choice. And so people and candidates who end up doing well in those states tend to get more attention and end up seeming like they're more viable candidates. And those candidates to qualify for the debate stage also needed donations from 225,000 unique donors. There's supposed to be a 0 at the end, and a minimum of 1,000 unique donors per state in at least 20 states. So the thresholds to qualify for the debates are getting like very high, right? It's very difficult to get this kind of both money and polling in all of these early states. First, because there were so many different candidates running that it was just hard to get attention on your own campaign, but also because getting donations is just a difficult thing to do in general. And that's part of the reason why we're seeing like these Democrats dropping out of the primary race, because they just can't keep up with other things. So the state of the race as it is now is that the Democrats have been pretty much able to winnow the field down to just like less than 23, which is a lot better than it like was earlier. And so it's becoming clear that Democrats are making it clear about who their choices are going to be heading into the primary season. And so another interesting thing about all of this is that because Senator Booker and former Secretary Castro are gone and have dropped out, and Andrew Yang was unable to qualify, there's actually not going to be any people of color on stage. And that's also supposed to include Kamala Harris, but clearly it does not. And so that's actually been something that's very interesting, especially because immigration and all of those topics are such big issues. We'll see how it is addressed tomorrow on the debate stage. Okay, so another thing I wanted to talk about, just to like clarify, is the difference between a caucus and a primary. So this is something that's pretty big in AP Gov, but can also be talked about in terms of like argument and AP Lang. And so caucuses are run by political parties, and so people can either openly show support for a candidate or a secret ballot system is used. And so in Iowa, people physically gather in different groups in like a gymnasium or something like that to show support for a candidate. And so if a candidate doesn't get 15%, its supporters either have to choose another candidate or they have to convince other caucus goers to join theirs. And that's something that's been like a very interesting way for like democracy to happen, right? Because it's all out in the open. Like you get to convince other people to join your caucus, and if you fail, well, then your candidate doesn't meet the threshold of 15% is considered non-viable. On the other hand, primaries are run by states, and it's pretty much where you just like go and vote. So states either have open primaries where voters can choose the candidate they want to represent the party, regardless of whether or not they're like registered. So you could be like registered as, well, you have to be registered to vote, but you could be registered as a Democrat and vote in the Republican primary, or be registered as a Republican and vote in the Democratic primary. So that's how it works here in Texas, where me and Brandon are from. But some states have closed primaries where if you're a registered Democrat, then you can only vote on Democrat nominees and candidates. And so one way that you can talk about this in terms of like AP Lang and argumentation is the difference between having discourse be out in the open and forcing people kind of to like publicly, to some extent, declare who they're going to be voting for, as opposed to like a secret ballot system where people don't have to discuss it and it's just in and out. And so, yeah, you can talk about how it's important to have discourse or whether it's better for people to be able to make their own choices independent of what other people feel or say. And so, one thing that we're going to talk about, because elections are obviously very important, is the fact that the Federal Election Commission is still frozen. And so it's not literally frozen. They're still doing like a lot of their regular business, things like publishing finance disclosures by campaigns and reviewing them. But because there is a lack of quorum, which means that there's a lack of the minimum amount of members that they need in order to like take important actions, they haven't been able to do a lot of things. So on Monday, just recently this week, 21 organizations that tend to be like more progressive, like Democracy 21, urged the Senate and the president to reconvene the FEC with members that would actually be committed to enforcing campaign finance law in an open letter. And so the reason why they said this is not because President Trump hasn't nominated anyone to the FEC, but because the Senate is choosing to follow tradition in terms of like how the FEC nominees have worked in the past. Specifically, usually in the past when presidents have nominated people to be on the FEC, they've nominated one Republican and one Democrat. So the FEC, it's really important that it's nonpartisan because the rules it makes affects pretty much every congressional race in the country, right? So both Republicans and Democrats like want to make sure it doesn't become an organization that's viewed as highly partisan, especially when it's doing like such important work. So President Trump has only nominated a Republican, and so the Senate has chosen not to like have any confirmation hearings for that yet. So right now, the FEC can't conduct meetings, it can't fine people or campaigns for any violations, it can't make any new rules or conduct and improve or review audits. And that's actually something that's really important, especially when we're heading into 2020. The FEC is pretty much on the front lines of making sure that campaigns are following rules, making sure that they're doing things that are legal and not having any like foreign interference, because the FEC is on like the front lines of protecting the nation from things like that from happening. And so if you're not aware of like what the FEC does, for a little bit of context, it enforces campaign finance laws, it'll investigate and prosecute any violations that happen, and it makes sure that there's like some transparency in the US government and congressional elections by making public the finance reports that are filed so people know like where candidates' money is coming from. So like that's actually something that like you can even look up, like who's this person that has donated like millions of dollars. Like you can go to Open Secrets or something like that and check it out yourself to see who's donating what money to who. So it's obviously important that we know like who's donating to these candidates, and the FEC is not able to do that right now. So yeah, but the FEC has also been in the news for something that has to do with social media. So Facebook recently said that it's going to allow political ads to target its users, and it won't be changing how it handles ad content. And so it's pretty much saying that what it did in 2016, it's going to continue to do. So a lot of people were calling for Facebook to change its policies in terms of how it handled ad content, like doing things like flagging things if they're not true, or taking down political ads that spread disinformation, because in the 2016 election, Facebook was used for a lot of that. And Facebook has said it's actually not going to be doing that. So compared to Twitter, which has completely banned political ads, and Google, which is making it more limited of an ability to target people based with ads, Facebook really isn't doing that much or anything at all, actually. So Federal Election Commissioner Ellen Weintraub criticized the policy and said that the weak plan suggests the company has no idea how seriously it's hurting democracy. And she pretty much said that they're choosing to prioritize profits over the health of a democracy. And so this is a very interesting topic because it brings into conversation the line between free speech and the government needing to step in and like regulate things. So Facebook is arguing that it won't fact check any free speech because or it won't do any fact checks because that's an issue about free speech and that as a platform, that's not its job. And it's also saying that if it wants that to happen, the United States needs to make new laws about political speech and social media. So that's actually something that you guys could talk about both in AP government essays and in AP Ling essays, because the line between the First Amendment and everyone's right to express how they feel and like have political ads be put out by their campaigns and the government's right to like regulate things and make sure that the public sphere is a safe one is a discussion that's happening continuously, especially because we have social media and all the rules are sort of like changing as to how they were before. So on that note, make sure you follow our AP Gov and AP Ling teams. We'll be back every Monday at 8:30 p.m. Eastern or 7:30 p.m. Central. And it'll be me, Brandon, Akhilesh, and we'll all be back. And so AP Ling streams on Mondays at 7 p.m. and AP Gov is on Tuesdays. So if you guys have any questions, now would be a great time to drop them in the chat so me and Brandon can try to get to them. Okay, so it looks like no one has any questions. So thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. Me and Brandon are so excited to see you, and we're glad to be streaming again. So thanks, guys. Bye. Have a great night.
Bye.